Hello, it's Martin back with yet another VW ID3. With the previous one I promised I would give you a full tour of the software and the computer systems, but that never quite happened. However, this example is running the software version 3.7, which realistically will be the last version this generation of MEB cars will get. So I thought I would take this opportunity to give you a full rundown of everything, all the features, the menus, and show you a few tips and tricks so you know how to get the most out of these vehicles. So let's fire up the vehicle by pressing the brake pedal. And before we move on to the infotainment system itself, I want to show you the instrument cluster because it is obviously digital. By default, it shows you three fields. In the middle, you have got a bold speedo with the current speed limit as well. On the left third, you have got the information from the advanced driving assistance systems. So think your adaptive cruise control, your lane keeping aid, etc. And on your right, is your trip computer. To enlarge either of the sections, use the touch controls on the steering wheel, which we have already discussed in depth on the channel. I will leave that video linked in the top right hand corner for you. Long story short, you just swipe over the view field and you can bring the ADAS view into focus while still seeing your speedo with your battery state of charge in percentage and predicted miles. Or you go the other way. Firstly, you return to the middle, and then if you swipe from the right again, you go into your trip computer view. If you want to change what data is displayed in there, you just keep pressing the OK button, and you can cycle between the since start, long term, or since charging counters. That right pane actually has two purposes. You can also put your sat-nav directions in there. To do that, you just need to swipe in from the right once again, and then the arrow view with the countdown to every intersection will replace the trip computer. Having it laid out this way obviously makes the most sense once the sat-nav is running, but in good news, it also works with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, so you don't necessarily have to rely on the built-in system. Again, a video covering how CarPlay is integrated into these cars is already live on the channel as well. But back to the instrument cluster, even if you return to the middle view now, the right panel will remain dedicated to the navigation system. In addition to the digital instrument cluster, which features the same style on all versions of the ID3, this top Max model also has a heads-up display. Heads-up displays are notoriously difficult to capture on video, so to make it a little bit easier for you and myself behind the camera, I will move to a dark car park. Basically, on these ID cars, they consist of two sections. Firstly, all the way at the bottom is a fixed bar which shows you your immediate speed in the middle and the speed limit, which is basically mirrored from the instrument cluster. And likewise on the left is a simplified view of the driving assistance systems, and on the right is the navigation arrow instructions. At least on this generation of ID cars you can't change it to the energy consumption. And right above that, that's the augmented reality section. The car was just started, so it's just showing this brand animation, but as you start driving, that's where all the other information which gets overlaid onto the road will pop up. Like for example, alerts from the lane departure warning, information about which vehicle is tracked using the adaptive cruise control, arrows from the navigation system, etc. With all of that out of the way, let's move on to the star of the show, the central infotainment screen. When I got the car, I already logged in with my VW ID, which means it pulled through my personal profile. If you're wondering how to get your profile picture up there, you simply need to upload it through the VW app or the VW online portal, and then it will sync over to the car as well. Unfortunately, to this day, you still need to press the OK button to continue past that screen into the infotainment system, even if you're the only user in the car. This enables all of the online functionality as well, which we'll get onto in just a second. Let's start with the basics, which is the layout. You see, I have come directly to the home screen. However, there are in fact two home screens, which can be a little bit confusing for some people who are new to these VW systems. You either have the option of the app grid, which looks very similar to your phone, but if you press the home button again, it turns into your widget view, and this one shows you your maps, and you can customize what all the other shortcuts are. You do that by simply pressing and holding. And for example, in this scenario, if I want to replace the help tile with something else, like for example the sound settings, I can do it straight through there. If I click the pencil button, I can also add additional pages, and here you can see what types of predetermined layouts are available. I'm perfectly happy with the 2 pages which come with the vehicle as default. So I will close out of that, and now we are back to the home screen. You will also notice that as I'm moving my finger closer, some additional labels and buttons may appear, but if I get away from the screen after a couple of seconds, those disappear for a cleaner user interface. That's because there are proximity sensors integrated into these touch sliders underneath the screen, and that's one of the reasons why they are not backlit. So on the newer VW cars, they are backlit, but you will have lost this functionality, which realistically not that many people care about. The other feature which they facilitate are the hand gestures. So if you want to swipe through different pages of the infotainment system, you can do so simply by swiping your hand across without touching the screen. But realistically, you're so close to the screen that you might as well touch it. You will also hear it makes these whooshing sounds every time you do that. The same goes for actually touching the screen. There is a bit of a click. All of that can be disabled, and I will show you how in just a second, because I personally find it quite annoying. If you want to go back to the apps grid, you will have noticed that the home button has changed to resemble the symbol of that. So you can just press that once and you are back to your old school apps layout. Following on with the phone parallels, just like all of your notifications get grouped into a notification center at the top of the screen, here is the same system. You just swipe down all the way from the top edge, and you either get access to these quick shortcuts which you can customize, and I will get onto that in a second because there are some crucial options in there, or you can swipe over one page to the right, and that's where you see all of your active notifications, and the count is displayed in the top right hand corner of the screen, even if you have the notification shade hidden away. At the moment it just simply complains that my charge limit is set to above 80%. So let's just close out of that and move on to the apps one by one, starting with telephone. This is the built-in VW phone interface, and if we go into it, you will see there is not much to explore, because my phone is indeed connected wirelessly, but that's for Apple CarPlay functionality. And if you have Apple CarPlay running, you will simply get a shortcut here forcing you into the CarPlay interface if you want to make phone calls, and this simply serves as a menu to dial the emergency services or the VW breakdown assist if you are stranded on the side of the road. If you don't particularly care for Apple CarPlay and you want a more old school interface, you can go into the Bluetooth settings, and that will force the phone to disconnect from CarPlay, and then you can use the built-in interface, including your recent phone calls with your contacts imported, and you have a normal dial pad as well. I think I will need to do a lot of blurring here not to leak people's personal details. But that's that. You can also see your phone's signal and current battery state of charge. Interesting that the phone seems to have weaker signal than the car. Moving on to the next app, which is radio and media. We will mute that for now, and this is very self-explanatory. Each of these apps has a submenu with the core functionality always on the left-hand side, and then here you can choose your media source, so you can go into your traditional radio with either FM, DAB, or if you are paying extra, you can also utilize the built-in internet radio using the car's data plan. From my experience, I much prefer listening to my own media, and to do that, you can go into the media tab, where you can either access Bluetooth, just like normal, and that pulls through the artists, playlists and albums from your mobile phone, if you are using the built-in player and storage on your phone. Or alternatively, you have got the My Media tab, and that's where it gets a little bit interesting, because you can use a USB thumb drive to not just bring music but also videos with you into the car. I will leave a link to this particular one, which features a USB-C end on one side and a old school USB-A on the other one. It will be an Amazon affiliate link. I will probably make 1p from selling you that, but it's one way of supporting the channel without it costing you absolutely anything. And if I plug that into the USB port, you will see that now you have an additional input, which is the USB stick. In here I made a folder with some of the royalty-free music I use. So if we play that, you can listen to proper uncompressed WAV files in full quality, enjoying the best the sound system can offer, even though the sound quality in these ID3s is not exactly something to write home about. But if you want the best, this is your option, because you have got no compression by going over wireless or through the internet. And as I mentioned, you also have the option of videos. The ID3 is quite picky which formats are supported, but if you are willing to do the homework and get everything prepared, you can keep the kids entertained while you are, for example, charging at a service station. Under settings, there is not much else. You can just choose whether you want the traffic announcements to come through even when the radio is silenced. You can choose how the logos for the radio stations are pulled through, etc. Not much else to say, so let's move on to the navigation system, because there is a lot to explore in there. I know your initial reaction may be, I don't care, I will just use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with Google Maps, Waze, and I will get where I need to be. But remember, this is an electric car, so especially if you're new to EVs, you want to use the built-in system because it will help you out a lot with planning out your journeys, charging stops, and estimating how much range you will have at each destination. So firstly, obviously, you've got your map, and you can choose different views from this 3D perspective view to a north-up view, or still a top-down view, but now in the direction of travel. I personally prefer the 3D view because it looks very similar to something like Google Maps or all of these other phone apps. And despite all of the bad press these infotainments got in the early days, they are quite responsive, and they do also support multi-touch. So it's not obviously as nice and neat as the latest iPad, for example, or anything Tesla offers, but it genuinely does the job quite well. You can still move the map as needed, and it doesn't really skip a beat. If you want to return to the default view, you can just press the automatic scale button and it will bring you back to your current location. Speaking of which, at the bottom left corner of the map, you've got multiple options. Here you can use the slider to adjust the volume of the navigation announcements, and whenever you adjust that,
announcement volume,
you get a preview of how loud it will be. You can also mute the instructions, or you can get the lady to repeat the last instruction. You can also choose the style of the map, so now it's on the day bright view. Actually, automatic is probably the best, because then when it gets dark outside, it will automatically darken to be less distracting. And you can also make sure that charging stations are displayed. And if you go into this sub-menu with the settings, you can specify which ones you want to appear. Unfortunately, you cannot go provider by provider. VW has tried to simplify the system, especially if you go abroad, the list would be absolutely endless. So here you can just choose by the power output, whether you just want to show live available charging stations, Ionity, or any of the ones which are compatible with the VCharge Pass, which is VW's own RFID card and app membership, which you can use if you just want to have one account for paying for all of your charging. If all of those toggles are off, it means that all charging stations will be displayed on the map. And lastly, the range toggle. It's not very obvious when you are zoomed in this close, but when you zoom very far out, you will get a preview of how far you can reach on the current state of charge. It is definitely on the optimistic side at the moment. It's predicting 161 miles of range, and it's a little bit more obvious when you have the map oriented in north up, but it's thinking I could get all the way up to about Grimsby or almost Leeds. The important thing to point out here is that it's not a perfect circle, and that's because the car is using the data from the navigation to estimate how far you will actually get on the roads you would be driving on. So that includes the topography, the speed limits, etc. Once again, I will come back in because I want to show you how these charging stations appear on the map. So for example, we have got a 50 kilowatt station nearby. You can just click on the point of interest and it shows you that it's an ESB station, and it will take 8 minutes to drive there because it's 1.4 miles away. If you want to, you can add it either as a waypoint, or you can add it to your favorites, or you can start navigating there directly. However, to make it a little bit more interesting, I will bring myself back in here and let's try to go somewhere really far away. Let's say that you want to go on a road trip to Edinburgh, for example. I generally can't stand laggy keyboards in cars, but luckily, again, with this latest iteration of the software on these ID cars, it is fairly responsive. And you see, I didn't need to know the exact postcode or anything like that. It can search for points of interest as well. and it will realize that, oh, it is really far away, 413 miles. It will take 8 hours and 28 minutes to do the journey, and we will need 2 charging stops, which will total 53 minutes. So if I click start now...
The next stopover is on a limited access road. Your route contains multiple essential charging stops.
It tells us that charging stops have been added to the journey plan, and if you want to see more details of those, just swipe over the pane from the right, and it has actually chosen very sensible options. So first would be Moto at Grantham Services, and when you click onto that stopover point, it will show you that we would arrive there with 13% after traveling 128 miles, and we would need to wait 32 minutes to get up to 80%. And the next stop would be then at an Instavolt station, and we would arrive with 11% to that point, and we would only need to charge for 22 minutes to reach 62% to get to Edinburgh with exactly 10% in the battery. Is that not a comfortable buffer enough for you? Do you want to arrive with 20-30%? That's a thing you can adjust in the settings. So, firstly, we can get rid of this sidebar. You will also see that as you travel along the journey, it will show you any points of interest which it thinks are relevant, like for example motorway services right on there. So you can always expand it and see where the next rest stops are. And yeah, let's move into the settings now, because that's where we can customize everything to our liking. With the route guidance, here is where you can change how the electric route planner behaves. So firstly, if you're hardcore and you want to always arrive at 0% and you don't care for what the car is suggesting and you find it annoying that it always tries to divert you, you can just toggle it off and then it behaves like an old school sat-nav. However, I will keep that enabled just so I can demonstrate these other settings, and this is where you can set how much range you want to have at either charging stops along the route, which is this option, and you will see whenever you change that,
multiple essential charging stops.
The sat-nav will recalculate the route, and you can also separately adjust how much range you want when you reach destination. So for example, if you know that there is no charging available where you are going, you can slide the slider all the way to 50 miles, so the car will make sure that you have enough energy on board when you get there. Lastly, if you do have that aforementioned Recharge membership, you can just toggle this on and the car will prioritize those chargers, but if needed, also use others to get you to your destination. My one complaint is that unfortunately all of this is done in miles rather than percentage, which I appreciate may be easier to understand for the EV novice, but I would just like to set that I want to arrive with 10% to every charging stop en route, whereas here you need to do a little bit of guesswork, but realistically the lowest you can set it to is about 10%. I've never seen it go lower than that. Whenever you dip to 9% or 8% on arrival, the car just tries to squeeze in an additional charging stop. Other than that, you also have your traditional route criteria, so you can avoid motorways, avoid toll roads, and it's all very neatly broken down in line with this car being designed in mainland Europe, where you can also separately avoid vignette roads or toll roads based on which country you are going to. Very granular. Going back out again, if you want the car to reroute you around traffic congestion, by default it will ask you for that, but you can also have it set to on, and in that case it will automatically do it straight away in the background. If you are just driving along and you are running low on range, you can get range warnings and then it will automatically pop up with nearby charging stations. It can also display the country information when you cross borders, again designed mainly for mainland Europe use. It will show you the respective speed limits on the different types of roads you will be driving on. Quite handy. These more elaborate 3D views when you're changing motorways and dual carriageways. And lastly, I've got some settings in there for your speed limit warnings. Moving out of here to go back to navigation announcements. In addition to the quick settings which you could adjust directly from the map view, here you can adjust how comprehensive the lady is. So you either get the full directions including the street names you need to turn into, or just a shortened version, or just these brief sound cues to not disturb other passengers. You can also adjust how they behave during phone calls and adjust the volume once again. Lastly, you've got the basic functions here, and this all has to do with how the sat-nav learns your preferred driving routes and where you are going, because if we go back into the search field, as you use the system more and more, it will automatically learn, even in the background without you necessarily putting the destinations in, when and where you go, and it will start populating this circle with what it thinks are relevant suggestions. Oh, and lastly, I realized we skipped over this a little bit. If we go back to contacts, whichever contacts you have on your phone with an address in there as well, they will come through directly here. So once again, if you are not planning on using Apple CarPlay for navigation, you still have a way of quickly getting to your address book from your phone without having to use the actual phone while driving. Good. With that, I will just cancel the navigation for now by clicking the cross button. We can get back to the home screen to move on to the next app, which is vehicle settings. These are divided into interior and exterior. So let's start with the exterior. I will try to give you a very quick rundown of these because otherwise we would be here for days. Starting with the comfort light, this being the max version, it does have the IQ matrix headlights. If you want to learn more about those, and in fact what all of these settings mean, I've already done a video on that. So once again, linked in the top right hand corner. Because there truly is a lot you can customize. The animation of the taillights when the vehicle unlocks, you can enable or disable the scrolling indicators, etc. Next up, tires. The ID3 doesn't feature tire pressure monitoring sensors. It just uses the ABS system to monitor any abnormalities with the difference in rotations of all wheels as you are moving down the road. So I'm afraid there is no way to view specific tire pressures, but this is where you can reset the system once you've set the tire pressures to the correct level to monitor the baseline, and you also can manually set a fixed speed warning at whatever mileage you need. This is generally designed if you're on winter tires, which have a lower speed limit, but in the UK you will probably never have to touch this setting. Next up, mirrors, and there is a very important trick to mention here because I see this being quite confusing. There is a toggle which enables the mirrors to lower in reverse gear. Well, first of all, it's only the passenger mirror which lowers, and secondly, even with this toggle enabled, after every restart, by default, the mirror directional switch, the joystick which is by your right knee, is in the neutral position, and when you go into reverse, the mirror on the passenger side will not dip. You need to flick the selector into the left position and only then will the mirror go into the lowered position so you can see the curb a little bit better. The other option is folding when locking, and this is pretty self-explanatory. Why it's nice that it's a toggle is because if you live in Scandinavia, for example, and you get very cold winters, it is generally recommended to leave the mirrors unfolded to not put strain on those little actuators if water and ice gets into the mechanism. Moving on, headlights. Again, this was covered in the dedicated headlights video, and there is a lot of functionality here you can customize. If you, for example, do not like the matrix and you want to be in charge of switching between the high beam and low beam yourself, you can do so through here. Next page brings us onto the brakes, and this is fairly simple. You will not have to touch much in here. There is a toggle for the auto hold system, but again we will get onto auto hold in a split second. Next up, windows. You've got convenience opening either on and off, which means that if you're away from the vehicle you can just press and hold the unlock button and the windows will roll down in accordance with what you have set in the infotainment system. The central locking submenu gives you the option to enable or disable the keyless entry. I know this is a point of contention, especially if you live in a house and you have your car right on the driveway next to your front door and you want to make sure that you are protected against relay attacks. It's nice to see that VW gives you a single toggle which you can turn off and the car will remember your preference and you don't have to go to any aftermarket coders to add or remove the functionality. You can also choose which doors get unlocked, but very annoyingly with ID3s, there are no touch sensors on the rear door handles. It's only the front ones on either side. So if you are trying to let someone in on the passenger rear side, you will first have to touch the passenger front door handle to unlock that entire side of the car, and then you can let people in. And the last page of the exterior is to do with the wipers. You have a toggle for automatic wipers, so if you want manual intermittent settings, you can disable that, and then the switch on the stalk will work as a manual intermittent switch, but I quite like auto wipers, so I'm going to leave that on. What I absolutely cannot stand, and I'm disabling immediately, is the rear window wiping in reverse gear, because with this the car very frequently thinks that the rear window is wet and it will wipe it the moment you go into reverse. And it's a lovely concept in theory, but in practice it means that it smears all the dirt over the rear screen, and it's very common that ID3s get little scratches in there because the grid is being moved over a dry piece of glass, and it also wears out the rear wiper blade. In fact, let me demonstrate it for you. So if I spray the front, it just sounds terrible. And it didn't spray the rear, it just thought the rear needed cleaning as well because I cleaned the front screen. Pointless, stupid. The last toggle is also visible in this outside menu, which is the service position, because the wipers on these ID3s are quite tucked in underneath the bonnet. If you want to change the wiper blades yourself, you can just press that button, they will go fully upright, and then you can lift the arms away from the windscreen and change the wiper blades easily without damaging any of the trims. Tap it again, and they will return back to normal. On the interior front, you can customize the head-up display, at least for these Max versions. I think I will make a dedicated video on the heads-up display and all the augmented reality features, because there's truly a lot to explore, so make sure to subscribe if you want to learn more about that. Back out of that, with the cockpit submenu, you've got dedicated reset options for the trip computer and not much else. Interior lighting is where you can customize how bright or dim all of the switch backlighting is, and you can also choose between the dark mode or the bright mode of the screen. I personally quite like the dark mode because then it nicely blends in with the bezels and it just looks a little bit more slick. Going back out of that, the roof, this version features the panoramic glass roof, and there is a dedicated touch slider for it here in the ceiling for the sunshade, which is motorized, but you can also set it to any given position you want through the infotainment system. A little bit redundant, but you know, it's all digital, so why not? Next up, the ID light. That's the light bar underneath the windscreen. This used to be standard on all ID3s, but it got discontinued, or at least it's a paid option on the newer ones, I believe. Very similarly to the head-up display, you can customize what features are shown on there, what triggers it, and how bright it is. And lastly, we've got seats. This Max version featuring the powered memory seats. You can customize whether the driver's and passenger seat will move backwards whenever you open the door to make it a bit easier to get in and out of the vehicle. That's the exterior and interior options covered. Now the next submenu is the status, and this is all very brief. If you haven't noticed, there is no dedicated odometer inside of the instrument cluster unless the vehicle has just woken up or has been turned off. So if you want to see the exact mileage with the vehicle running, you have to go into this menu. It shows you the total distance covered, or you can toggle to the other distance covered option, which is more of an old school trip computer, which you can also reset using that 0 button. It also shows you whether there are any abnormalities with the tire pressures, but as mentioned, there are no TPMS sensors, so you cannot see the value in bars or PSI. And you also see when the next service is due. The interval on ID3s, at least in the UK, it's once every 2 years, regardless of mileage. So don't be alarmed that it just says days and not how many miles the service is due in. It's because that is actually correct. Perfect. We are getting through it. Lastly, let's go into the data screen. And this is just the trip computer. The same thing which you see in the instrument cluster, but neatly laid out in the main screen. So you've got your since start, long term, and since charge counters. The since charge obviously gets reset automatically after every vehicle charge. The since start resets automatically after you have been out of the car for, I think, about an hour, couple of hours. However, if you just get out and jump back in a couple of minutes later, it's still counted as a single journey. But if you want to reset that manually, you can just press the zeros button there and the data will be reset immediately. And looking at the long term, I have not been doing badly with efficiency over the last 125 miles. almost 4 miles per kilowatt hour, despite still being in May with about 15 degrees Celsius. That's another app covered. So moving to charging, because this is quite important for electric vehicles. By default, VW recommends an 80% charging limit, and you can adjust it right within here using the slider. The minimum you can set it to is 50%, and if you want to, you can then adjust it in 10% increments. 80% is fine actually. Locations is where you can set charging settings for different locations, and the car will remember this automatically. You can have up to 5, and for example, if you want to charge at off-peak rates at home, but you get free charging at work, the car will remember that when you get home, it should wait and postpone the charging until your preset charging window, whereas at work, it will charge immediately, even if you use AC chargers at both locations. Lastly, under settings, you can enable battery care mode, which is just a very fancy way of saying that the battery will charge only to 80%. And it's actually quite cleverly implemented, because even if you go to charge to 100%, then the car is saying, yes, 80% charging is recommended, but after you charge to 100%, the battery care system will automatically lower the charging limit to 80% again, so you don't forget, and this helps the lifespan of the battery in the long term. Next up, you can reduce the AC charging current, and even though it's a single toggle, it applies differently to slow 3-pin chargers, so if you are charging from a domestic plug, whereas if you are charging out in the public and you are using a 3-phase connection, you would normally be getting 11 kilowatts at full power, whereas with this setting toggled, you get just under about 6. And the last option is to release the connector automatically. So the idea of this is that once you have finished charging, if you are in a communal car park where multiple people want to use the chargers, you don't have to come out to the car to unlock it. It will be automatically released once the car reaches your desired target state of charge, and someone else can come in and plug in. Okay, all of that is pretty self-explanatory, and we will move on to the next app, which is App Connect, which is VW's marketing term for all of these smartphone mirroring functions. So if we want to go back to using CarPlay, I will need to enable that, which means the Bluetooth connection will switch over to the wireless Apple CarPlay connection. My phone is still not connected to anything, but it's now using Wi-Fi to cast the image into the head unit. You don't really need to do anything. Just during the setup on the iPhone, you just need to enable the phone to use CarPlay in combination with the vehicle, and that's it, and you can use your preferred apps of choice. The CarPlay image takes the majority of the screen. You still get that VW sidebar, which is quite handy. Unfortunately, some of the information like the time is duplicated on there, but you at least have a quick access to your HVAC system. And if you want to go to the home screen, you don't need to go into CarPlay and find the VW app. You can do so by pressing the home button right there. Unfortunately, there are some quirks with the CarPlay integration. Again, like I mentioned, I've already done a full video of it, but one thing which I haven't mentioned is that if you go into, for example, use the voice control or the parking sensors pop up, which would take over some bits of the screen, if I demonstrate now, the entire CarPlay image goes blank, which is unfortunate, because if you're, for example, going through a narrow width restrictor, which are quite common in London, the moment the parking sensors pick up the obstacle, you will lose out all of your map information. Going back home, you can add multiple users to the vehicle, and this has been released in the later versions of the ID software. So as you can see, I'm now logged in. The way it works is that some of the settings are actually stored in the VW cloud. And the concept is that if I now log in to a different VW ID car with my login credentials, it means that those settings will be pulled through to that vehicle and I don't have to reset everything up from scratch. Unfortunately, the home screen layout does not move over. So that was a little bit unfortunate, because I like to have this set up a certain way, and I had to do that when I got this car. It didn't move from the old one. However, for example, the air conditioning fired up exactly to how I used to like it in the old ID3. Let's not get distracted with that, because we are talking about the users. So that's the main active user. And if we go into other, you can either log in as a guest, which is quite handy if you are ad hoc sharing the car with someone and you don't want them to access all of your login details or mess with your seat settings, because if I go into the guest mode, I can click OK. And the entire infotainment system goes into a separate mode. You have to enable online mode again. And if I adjust the seat, for example, right now, just for demonstration purposes, I will not use the preset buttons on the side of the seat to save this position. If I go back to my user profile, okay, the seat moves back to the position I had it in. So in some ways, it is actually quite Tesla-esque. I know that probably would have upset a lot of Tesla fanboys, but yes, I went that far. Anyways, last bit, settings. This is where you can log in. And if you want extra security when switching user profiles and you are, for example, sharing the car within a company and you don't want your personal details to be accessible to other people, you can also set a PIN code. And I've got this set already. So with the toggle enabled, every user will need to enter their own secure PIN every time they want to log into their profile. Crucially, this is purely for the infotainment system, so it's not like PIN to drive on said Teslas. So even with the infotainment completely locked up, the car will still let you go into drive and you can keep on using it. You just don't have access to the built-in computer system. As the primary user, you can also go into privacy settings, and this is where I would recommend turning everything on. Yes, you are to a certain extent signing your soul away to VW, but having the online connectivity is quite handy, and especially the V2X by default is turned off. I think it's probably due to privacy reasons, but V2X is imagined like ways where other people can report issues on the road. Well, with V2X, it's built into the cars that gets pushed automatically to the rest of the VW fleet. And I think some other manufacturers have also signed up to this protocol, so hopefully going forward, all brands will agree on what communication system will be used in the future, and it will just become a standard like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi has become. If you want to learn more about it, you can go into the information section here, and it's all laid out on what data gets accessed depending on which toggles are enabled. Moving to the last app on the first page, which is sound, and this is very straightforward. You have a basic equalizer where you can adjust the settings to your preference, and if you click the button in the top right hand corner, it gets reset to all zeros. You can also adjust the focus, and this is actually one way of easily testing whether your ID3 is equipped with rear speakers, because believe it or not, even in 2023 that used to be an option, but in the case of this Max model, it lets you go front and back and left to right with the fader, or you can reset it to the default center position. And volume is where you can individually adjust the volume for all of the different sources. So you've got your radio announcements, your voice control volume, how the car adjusts the volume based on your driving speed, the maximum switch on volume, which is quite handy. Again, if you're sharing the car with someone and they love their music really loud, but you don't want to be blasted with that the moment you jump in, you can reduce that and the car will then just ease into the music. You can lower the volume when you are parking to make it easier to hear the parking sensors. You can choose how loud the goodbye jingle is, etc. Lastly, a handy feature which I don't see on many cars is that if you are connected using the regular Bluetooth connection instead of CarPlay or Android Auto, you can choose how the infotainment boosts the volume to match the loudness of, for example, your traditional DAB radio, so you don't have to change the volume every time you switch your media source. From my experience, even having it on the medium setting is quite loud. Putting it on loud is literally ear-piercing. And lastly, under the settings tab, this is where you can disable some of these annoying touch buttons which you have been hearing up until now. So for example, the touchscreen tone of the infotainment. Now whatever I touch, there is not that clicking sound. You can disable the hand gesture tone, so that's what happens when you swipe your hand across to move between pages. And you can also completely disable the goodbye jingle if you are not a fan of it. Tone for other controls, that's for all of these other swipes, etc. You can make the car basically completely quiet. For the demonstration purposes, I will keep it all on. Moving on to page number 2, Background is not very clearly named because it has to do with the theme and the color scheme of the infotainment system and also of the ambient lighting. This is much easier to show in the dark, so once again we will go back to the car park. So with the outside lights dimmed, you should hopefully be able to see all of the ambient lighting in the cabin. There is a lighting strip in the dashboard, in the door cards, and the wireless phone charger pocket is also illuminated. Sorry for all of this mess, I haven't had a chance to properly clean the car yet. So let's go into the background app to see all the customizability options. There are different color presets, so you can go for any of these with the fancy name. And for example, if we go back to Eternity and I look into the door pocket, the upper half is more greenish steel, whereas the lower half is more blue. Other than the preset colors, I generally leave it set to automatic, which means that it's linked to the driving mode. We will touch on driving modes in just a second, but by default in comfort mode, all of the ambient lighting is white. If we switch over to eco mode, it will go nice light blue. In sport, it's obviously red because red adds extra 10 horsepower at the very least, and in individual it goes to yellow. I will go back into comfort because you can customize the ambient lighting separately from the driving mode. Of course, you can also completely shut it off, and there's also a brightness slider in case you find it a bit too distracting at night. You can dim all of the zones at once. But if you want to really make the car yours, you can set it to individual. And if we go into the individual tab on the left here, you can choose two colors, almost like your primary and accent color. So as you can see at the moment, all of the lights are white, and you can choose any other color on the RGB spectrum. But for the moment, I will actually leave it on the white setting because you can also customize the different zones individually. So if we go into this next option, the dashboard will stay white, but the door cards will be illuminated in the second accent color. Likewise, in this case, the wireless phone charger is also blue. And the last option is the wireless phone charger being the same color as the dashboard and only the door cards being in the accent color. Important to mention, regardless of which color mode you are in, so even if we go into everything being set to the same color, your footwells are still only going to be white. You can change the brightness of them, and if we go into the brightness section here, you can individually choose how bright you want the dashboard lights to be, how bright you want the door cards to be, and how bright you want the footwells to be, but the footwells unfortunately do not include those colorful LEDs. And the reason why this app is called Background is because in addition to changing the color of the ambient lighting, it also themes the entire infotainment system. So for example, now everything is a bluish color, whereas if I go back into backgrounds and make it red, the entire infotainment system is red, including the app tiles, and as you saw, when I go back into the app, the home button, the accent glow on the side, etc. But enough of messing with that, it's all a bit too garish for my taste, so I will just leave it in the automatic setting where I quite like it, in the nice neutral white. Continuing with the rest of the tour, the help essentially gives us a digital user manual. There are shortcuts to some of the quick and most important sections. If you want to, you can go into the full user manual, or you can just search for any particular term. So when I, for example, choose headlight, you can jump into any of the sections you require. With ID3s, you don't get a physical paper handbook, so you will have to rely on the digital manual, but I would recommend looking it up through the web, either on your phone or on your laptop, and bringing that into the car, because especially if you're trying to do something in the infotainment, it obviously isn't possible to do it both in the screen but also having the instructions in the screen. But that was boring enough. Let's move to stationary air conditioning, which is just a translated term and term honestly moved across from combustion engine vehicles, because this is where you can set your heating preferences when the car is actually turned off. So you can adjust your cabin temperature in half a degree Celsius increments, just like with the HVAC system as normal. And you can also choose whether you want your heated seats and heated steering wheel enabled when it's cold outside, or also the heater for the rear window. It makes the most sense when it's combined with a departure schedule, because that way you don't have to think about it and you can have multiple schedules set. So for example, you can have it to repeat on certain days and at a certain time the heating will come on automatically, or in the case of really hot summer days, the cooling, so you always enter a comfortable environment when you jump into the car. Honestly, one of the best perks of an electric drivetrain, which utilizes a massive energy bank in the form of a battery pack. I will disable it for now, not to draw power for nothing. And the last setting you can customize is whether you want the air conditioning to start the moment you unlock the vehicle. Obviously, having this toggle on will consume a little bit more power, but it means that, for example, if you're getting your family in, the moment you press the unlock button on your key fob, the HVAC system will come into life and it will start cooling or heating up the cabin. So by the time everybody is in, again, it enhances the comfort of being in the car. Perfect. Moving on to the last few things in the settings app. And you may be wondering, how is this different from the vehicle app, which we already covered? Well, with the vehicle, all of those features have to do with the vehicle, as the name suggests, whereas with the settings app, it's to do with the settings of the infotainment system. It's very kind of boring stuff, like, for example, the brightness of the screen. Some of these settings are repeated, which are in some of the other sections of the infotainment, like, for example, the tones of you pressing the buttons, whether you want the proximity sensor to be on, so the thing where some of the UI elements enlarge. As you move your hand closer, you can disable that and then they are permanently on. Whether you want the gestures to be on, because if you love to speak with your hands while you are driving, sometimes you accidentally change screens, so you can disable that, etc. You can also adjust the time and date, but obviously I've got that set to automatic. And if you are particularly enthusiastic about where you live, you can set the home button to be your country. So me being from Slovakia, should I represent? Look at that. Not exactly proud of that, to be fair. So let's quickly get rid of that and home button design, and let's keep it nice and neutral. Language, you can choose the language of the infotainment system. And speaking of languages, if you travel abroad frequently and you need some of the special characters of different languages, you can add additional keypads right in here. Within it's pretty self-explanatory. Most people care about what units you can set for the consumption. By default, you've got miles per kilowatt hour here in the UK. In Europe, it would be kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, but plenty of other options in there as well. And with voice control, this is one of the things where I will once again say a very important feature, at least in my eyes, to turn off immediately is the wake word. Because if you are just sitting in the car with someone talking to them, the car very often misinterprets what you are saying as the wake word, which is hello ID. And whenever you say that, it starts listening to you and it just gets very annoying very quickly. As clever as a system as it is, because it can recognize who is speaking to it and adjust the settings depending on that. So for example, if the passenger asks for the heated seat to be turned on, they don't need to specify it to be the heated seat for the passenger. The car automatically turns on the passenger heated seat. It's just a little bit too finicky, so I prefer to have it disabled. That way I can use the voice control only when intentional through the steering wheel button, and the passengers, of course, can just use the touchscreen because they are not watching the road ahead of them. And with this car being a modern internet-connected car, you can also connect to Wi-Fi or manage the mobile devices it's connected to. But realistically, I actually haven't had much of a need to connect to Wi-Fi because all of the over-the-air software updates, for now at least, have been downloaded using the built-in cellular connection. And that's it. Not much really else to talk about. The configuration wizard is what you can use if you need to quickly get driving after you got the car, but you want to go through all the steps and make sure that everything is set up. You can do so through here. Lovely. Going back to the home screen, and we will fly through the next things because the driver assist I will touch on in a second. You can also access it using the physical hotkey. The ID software is the important one if you are buying an ID 3 or 4 on the used market. With this app, it tells you in very simple terms what software version the car is on, and realistically I would recommend you get them on at least 3.1. The software updates are completely free and they bring a lot of bug fixes, and I think especially with the version 3.7 the battery management system has gotten a little bit more aggressive. So Ideally, you want the car to be on the latest version, just so you don't have to go through the hassle, because there are quite a few steps to software updates on these ID cars. And in fact, there are so many steps that I had to make a dedicated video about it to explain what you need to do and which options you need to take to get them to update. And even then, the updates are not immediate, they are rolled out in stages. It is just a little bit of a messy process compared to the Tesla system, for example. Moving from there is the shop. And the shop doesn't really do much at this stage. It features apps which you can download to the vehicle post-purchase. If you had a lower trim level of the ID3 with some of the features which can be unlocked through software, you would find them here. For these maxes, there is not much to do unless you want to, for example, activate the swarm data for the travel assist or renew your WeConnect Plus subscription if you are after more features in the accompanying smartphone app. If you want to let me know whether you would like a dedicated video on all of this, but it's pretty self-explanatory, so I don't think we need to waste any more time on that. And the legal stuff is also very self-explanatory and very boring. It's all the disclaimers and the copyright information in there, and it will take forever to download now because I think it has to fetch that from the internet. So yeah, nothing exciting there. So with all of those out of the way, let's move on to the shortcut buttons underneath the screen. Starting from the left, you've got the parking menu, and this brings up the parking assistant. I will have a separate video discussing all of these features because there's lots to explore. With these latest generation ID3s, they can also memorize certain spaces and maneuver automatically into them. If you have, for example, a driveway you get into regularly, etc. So there is lots to play about with, but just so you know, this is where you activate the park assist view, and you can also press the parking symbol there, and then you, in the case of this car, you get a 360 camera, and if you keep pressing that small tab on the side there, that's how you will toggle that view on and off. I haven't really found any way of engaging the reversing camera in full screen mode other than actually going physically into reverse. Great. Into park and moving into the climate control, because this is very important. With ID3s, there's a lot of complaints about these touch capacitive sliders underneath the screen to adjust the temperature, but you don't really have to use them much at all. That's because the climate control, you can either access it by clicking the climate shortcut, or even easier, you can just press that section of the touchscreen there and it brings you into the same menu. I've got it turned off now, so to turn it on, I just press the on-off button at the top left of the screen and it fires into life. Something which is slightly confusing initially, even though we are in the sync mode, because there's no one sitting in the passenger seat, the car defaults to that section of the vehicle being in eco mode, which means there is less air conditioning power spent in that area, and most of the heating in this case will go towards the driver. The moment you get someone in there, it automatically turns into a standard 2-zone climate control, at least on ID3s which do have 2-zone climate. The base models, I believe, only had single-zone climate. As you may have noticed, that also means that to turn on the heated seats you can't do it through here. You have to press the area to go into the menu and then use the heated seats buttons. However, a little trick is that you can use 2 fingers to touch the slider at any given time, and that's how you can turn on the seats, and not just turn them on, but you can keep pressing 2 fingers on the touch sliders, and that's how you go through the different levels of seat heating. It does take a little bit of getting used to. You need to be very particular with how you place your fingers on the touch slider, but it does the job. And when it comes to adjusting the temperature, yes, you can either slide or you can just tap the sides of it, and there is a little reach so you can tell the moment it ends and turns into the volume slider. But realistically, I have the air conditioning set to anywhere between 20 and 21 degrees in the winter and 21 and 23 degrees in the summer, and once I set it at the start of the journey, I never really have to touch it. It's a very well-tuned automatic air conditioning system. Speaking of which, that's what you would find in the classic climate section. So for now, even though the temperature is set automatically, we are in manual mode where you can choose where the air goes. This is pretty standard stuff. If you want the car to take care of everything and be super consistent, as I mentioned, I generally always have it in auto mode. And even in auto mode, you can press the little arrow and choose how aggressive it is. So if you don't like the fan to get too loud, you can go into a lower fan strength. And that way the cabin will be a little bit quieter. I personally find the medium perfectly adequate. This is also where you have to turn on the heated steering wheel. You've got 3 stages, but you have to go into this sub-menu. But this is where some of the tricks of these MEB cars come into play, because yes, if you just want to use the heated steering wheel like in an old school car where you have a button for it, yes, it's a little bit clunky, because first of all you need to press that in the screen and then you have to go into the steering wheel. Obviously this HVAC menu will disappear after a while, and especially if you're using navigation, you want to see the map. Then when it gets too hot, you want to reduce it again. It's all just a little bit of a faff. However, you can go into Smart Climate, and this is where some of the features are automated and coupled and also integrated with the voice control. So for example, if my hands are cold, I can just press the warm hands button. And it's not just a button. What the car does is that it now ramped up the heating power going to these air vents. I could hear, it probably doesn't come across on video, that the fans have picked up and there is some warm air coming out of these air vents. If I go into the classic climate view, you will see that the heated steering wheel also came on automatically to help warm up my hands. And it is almost like a timer which counts down in the background. So after about a minute or two, the car will go back to the standard automatic setting where it just keeps the entire cabin at a consistent temperature. As I said, you can also do this through the voice command. So for example, I can say, "My feet are cold."
No problem. Warming feet at the front.
And if we look into the climate menu, what's happening, it cancelled the warming of the hands now and it went into warming of the feet mode, where there's now hot air coming out of the footwells. It's all quite neat, and I know this may be a problem which didn't need solving, but the idea with these modern cars is to basically always rely on the automatic air conditioning, and that way you never have to fiddle with the dials while you are driving. If you want to cancel any of these smart modes, you just press it again and it goes back to the fully automatic setting. Lastly, in here with the higher end versions of the ID3 also have air care, and if you press the air care button, it will start recycling the air and pushing it through the cabin air filter multiple times in an effort to clean the cabin. It tries to be something like Tesla's bioweapons defense mode, but this is a normal pollen filter. It's not at the same level as Tesla's HEPA filter, so the results aren't quite as impressive, but it's better than nothing, and especially if you have allergies, for example, it is a nice feature to have. And once the entire cabin has turned blue, that's how you know that the ID3 thinks that it has filtered out all the contaminants from the air. And if you turn air care off, it will slowly realize that the air quality is decreasing in the interior. That's pretty good. I think we covered most things there. But continuing on the theme of not having to press things while driving, if you go into the settings, you can also enable automatic air recirculation. This is on by default, and I would recommend leaving it on. With an electric car, it makes sense to have it on because it's also for the purposes of energy efficiency. Once the cabin is up to temperature, the car can decide how much air it will use from the outside versus the inside to reduce the energy expenditure on heating or air conditioning. And secondly, if it's cold outside, you can set your heated seats to automatically come on at whatever preference you have. The same goes for the steering wheel. So that way in wintertime you don't even have to press any of the buttons. The moment you jump in, start driving, the heated seats will already be on. However, I do think you will have to turn them off. This is not quite the same as with Tesla's and BMW's latest systems, where the regulation happens fully automatically in the background. And to modulate the heated steering wheel without having to go into this menu every single time, what you want to do is customize the quick shortcuts I shown earlier in the beginning of the video. Because these are the default ones, but you can press and hold and manage the favorites you have in there. So for example, if you don't care for the audio mute button, which is a bit pointless because the same functionality can be achieved by pressing the touch button on the left corner of the touch sliders, I like to have the heated steering wheel in there, and all you need to do is just drag and drop and that shortcut gets replaced. Secondly, navigating to home, quite handy. The muting of the navigation announcements is handy to have right in there, so you don't have to go into the map view and into the settings in there. And lastly, the auto hold toggle means you never have to go into the vehicle settings. It's all just one swipe and tap away to toggle auto hold on and off. Because on these ID3s it is quite sensitive, so if you are parking and maneuvering, it makes your job really difficult because it just grabs the brakes all the time and it's very difficult to inch forwards and backwards as you're trying to get into a tight space, but it's quite handy to have if you're stuck in stop and go traffic, for example. So that's how I like to have the quick access shortcuts configured, and as I was saying, it means that instead of going into the HVAC menu while you are driving, you can just click the steering wheel symbol and it will toggle through all of the stages of the steering wheel heating, or you can use the voice command to say turn on the steering wheel heating to level 2.
Okay.
And it has done it without me having to take my eyes off the road. That is probably more than enough of air conditioning talk, so let's move to the driver assist menu, because this one looks very different to all the other ones in the car. The graphic you see here, you can touch elements of it and it brings up the relevant settings. It is a little bit confusing at first, so if you want a more old school menu of all the features, you can just press that button on the top left corner and you get a list view with all the features your car is equipped with, and you can drill into any of these. I have already covered the adaptive cruise control system in these ID3s in a previous video, so you know where this is going. If you want to learn more about that particular functionality, you can check it out on the channel. But what the important bits are here is that it is tied to the driving mode, which I haven't mentioned in that video. So if you are in eco mode, for example, it will accelerate and decelerate a little bit smoother. You can also turn off the lane keeping system in here if you find it too intrusive. For better or for worse, lane assist is one of those features which will reset after every vehicle restart, and there is no way to add the shortcut for that particular thing to the shortcut menu at the top of the screen. So you will have to go into the assist menu and then press the toggle switch to disable it every time you start driving if you hate your car intervening with lane keeping on the road. However, I believe VW listened to user feedback on this, and it is now possible to be a shortcut in the newer models. You also can customize how the side assist behaves, so whether it's active and how bright the indicators are in the wing mirrors, the dynamic roadside display, whether you get a warning when you go over the speed limit, the driver alert system. With this generation of ID3s, they do not have a driver monitoring camera, but the system monitors the inputs on the steering wheel, the pedals, and over time determines whether you are straying out of the norm and whether you need to take a break. It also takes into account how long you've been driving for, etc. And the last one, which is quite important, is the eco assistance, because by default, when you are in D, in drive mode, the car will coast, but when it detects other vehicles or it thinks that you are about to take an exit of the motorway, it will automatically start applying regenerative braking to slow you down a bit. If you don't like that and you want the car to always coast, you can just flick that off and it will not bug you with any reminders using the ID light nor in the instrument cluster, and it will just keep on coasting. I quite like it, so I will leave it turned on. And at the end of the list you have got some safety features. The front assist is quite lenient on ID3s. It's not too intrusive, it doesn't beep at you all the time, so it's fine to leave that on. It's an extra safety feature which is nice to have. And the emergency assist as well. I haven't really had any false positives of it slamming on the brakes, so I'm comfortable leaving that on all the time. And at the end of the day, it is an extra safety feature which could save your front bumper one day. Excellent. We are almost there. The last button below the screen is the driving mode button. The lovely thing, which I'm very glad to say, is that the ID3 remembers which driving mode you left it in. So for example, if I go into eco mode, I turn off the car, I lock it for a day and I come back to it, it will restart in eco mode. And if you press the info button here, it gives you a breakdown of what the modes affect. But importantly, you can go into individual and then you really customize it. So as you noticed, because we've got the ambient lighting tied to the driving mode, the cabin turned a little bit yellow to match the individual mode. And here you can choose, in the case of this particular car, what your damping settings are, because it does feature adaptive dampers. It's quite a rare option on ID3s. And you can also adjust how the driving experience is, how the adaptive cruise control behaves, etc. And if you have messed with this too much and you want to go back to normal, you can just press reset and it will reset all of those options in individual mode. I will be honest, I've basically been driving in comfort mode all the time. It's tuned quite nicely and it does the job. The ID3 is not a particularly sporty car. It doesn't encourage you to absolutely push it around every corner. Oh, and if you don't like touching the screen to change the modes, you can just keep pressing the mode button, and that also works as a toggle to cycle through all the different modes. And after a while, that screen will disappear and go back to whatever you were on previously. So with all of that, it's time to shut off the car, which you do simply by unbuckling your seatbelt. You get a goodbye screen, you get a summary of your charging plan, how much you will charge to, and whether you have any timers set. You can set the air conditioning to start running now. It's not very well phrased, but that means even when you lock the car, the AC will keep running for 30 minutes. So if you're, for example, leaving a dog in the car while you just pop out to the shop, it's a very handy feature to have. You also have the option to turn on the stationary air conditioning for your next departure time, save the parking process, which we will discuss in that separate video, and also a quick toggle switch to disable interior monitoring if, again, you are leaving pets in the vehicle and you don't want to trigger the alarm. You can also customize the order of these items by pressing the pencil button, and then you can move everything into the order you prefer. And at last, that really should be it. It's getting dark outside. Kudos to you if you made it this far into the video. Hit the like button if you found all of this helpful, and I will obviously appreciate that. If you want to learn more about EVs, make sure to subscribe. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.